again for another edition of Sabbath School here on Whispering Hope. Whispering Hope Sabbath School. It's just that God has been good to you over the course of the week, and you're in good spirit, you're in good health. We're in for another wonderful lesson today. It's going to be a treat. So the only thing that I would implore you to do at this time is to call someone, invite them, tell them Whispering Hope Sabbath School is on. We're talking about education, the family unit, the center of this education that God intends and wants all man and all woman to have. So this is applicable to everyone. So don't pass that opportunity by. Call a friend, call a neighbor, call a co-worker. Tell them this is the lesson study that they want to listen to. Well, again, this morning we have a wonderful host of panelists who are here with us. We have Pastor Joseph returning with us again. And again, he's here, the director at the South Leeward Campus. This morning we also have an educator and a parent himself, one of no small renown, Myrick Smith, who's been a veteran in the educational field and a Christian man of God. And again, we have Elder Joseph, Elder Edson Joseph. He's the man behind the scenes here at Whispering Hope, putting all of this together. And I'm your host, your facilitator, Ken. Welcome again. So we're talking about education in the family. But before we do, we want to have a word of prayer. And actually, before we do have a word of prayer, I just want to give Elder Joseph a minute or two to bring to you some very important information. Elder Joseph? Elder, if you're speaking.
Yes, Elder, basically, no, we're happy to have all our friends and visitors joining us today. Today's lesson 2, and we're happy to have Elder Myrick Smith joining us. We should have had a mother, because that was the intention. A mother who is an educator and a father who is an educator, but last minute we got some bad news. So regarding that, the person was unable to join us because of anything wrong with them directly. So we're going to another powerful study, and we pray that you will be blessed in Jesus' name. Amen. Happy Sabbath.
We're getting a feedback there coming through, but Pastor Joseph, as usual, the resident chaplain, would you lead us into our opening prayer?
Okay, good morning, everyone. Let us bow our heads as we pray. Eternal God and our loving Heavenly Father, we come to you this morning again, acknowledging that you are the God of the universe, that you are the one in whom we live and move and have our being. We come, Father, in confession this morning, asking that you will search us and clean us. And even as we are about to study your word, we ask for your Holy Spirit's presence with us. May he guide us through this study, and may the study be one that will enhance our relationship with you. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Amen. And so we pick up lesson number 2 where we left off last week. And Pastor Joseph, I and Brother Myrick Smith, I think you're both educators, and I also did a little bit of teaching in my time, nothing compared to what Brother Smith has done. But I know that one good rule of teaching is that we sort of recap what we would have covered, and then we try to connect how that relates to what is coming. So Pastor Joseph, I'm just going to give you a minute to recap the essence of the teaching last week and how it connects to what is coming this week.
Okay, so last week we dealt with the whole, the previous lesson, we dealt with the whole idea of the first classroom and the critical importance of knowledge. And we looked at how God in the first classroom, as the first teacher, created an atmosphere for imparting knowledge to the student. We looked at the fact that even in a perfect classroom, it is possible that there can be distractions. and we saw destruction coming in, and we saw the effect of the destruction. And so as a result, the knowledge that was imparted in the first classroom was corrupted by the intruder, the enemy himself. Revelation called him Satan, the devil, and he was the one who caused the disruption. But as a result, we see what good teachers do, and that is they do not discard their students after failure, but they seek to re-engage them and draw them into a relationship that allows them to see the folly of their mistake and learn from that mistake to move on and become something better and greater in society. And so that lays the foundation for where we go today, because the very first classroom was the very first parent. And so that sets the parameters or the foundation for what we're going to be looking at today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Pastor Joseph. So, Brother Myrick Smith, having listened to that recap and you coming on this week, having looked at lesson number 2, what would you say? Could you distill the essence of lesson number 2 for us insofar as the family and education that God intended for it to be a concern?
Good morning, brethren, and happy Sabbath to you all and to those who are listening or viewing. But okay, I must say that it is a pleasure for me to be on a panel with you discussing the Sabbath School lesson, because I consider you to be an expert at this stage in conducting the Sabbath School lesson every Friday evening, including last evening. You know, I have sat at your feet, you and Brother Thomas and Brother Bell, and I think the other brother whose name I forgot there, so many times. So it's a pleasure now to be on the same panel with you. And Pastor Orville.
Just to tell the audience that I sat at the feet at Gamaliel, and that Gamaliel was Brother Myrick Smith in high school. So you taught me
that is so interesting, because you know this lesson, this quarter's lessons is about education and teaching and so on. So everything fits in nicely there. I am, of course, fascinated by this lesson, especially since I have been in education for over 40 years, so that I can relate to so many of the things that the lesson is bringing out, both from a theoretical standpoint and actually also from a practical standpoint, having seen these things demonstrated. So as Pastor Orville laid the foundation there with the first lesson, we are moving now the second week into seeing the importance of the family in the whole context of education, and especially in the context of Christian education. The family plays a very, very important part. As a matter of fact, the family plays a foundational part in education of children, and the role of the father in the family, the role of the mother in the family. These are the salient points that are examined in this week's lesson, and we shall be dissecting them as we go forward.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Brother Smith, for that wonderful introduction, overview into the lesson. Elder Joseph, Elder Edson Joseph here, I wanted to ask you a question, because quite often we separate the secular and the sacred. But Christian education, the concept has been introduced there by Brother Myrick Smith. What is the connection between a Christian education, having that foundation based in Christian education, and that we may quote unquote say that we may get from an institution such as a university, a school that is not necessarily Christian based? Is there any connection between the two?
Elder, there is a connection between the two, but what we must pay keen attention to, because as we discuss this topic, many persons basically get sidetracked by the academics when the lesson is not necessarily speaking to the academics, but about developing students who will be rounded and fitted for eternity. And as I went through the lesson last night again after our study, I discovered from the text used in the lesson this week that God really wants us to teach our children the testing truth, what we refer to as Seventh Adventists as testing truth, but the pillars on which our faith is being built. So he spoke, you see coming out creation, you see coming out the fall, you see the redemption of man, you see the second coming of Jesus, you see the incarnation of Jesus Christ in the various texts, and that's just a few. And when our children would have had those formative years with us, those are principles that we should have instilled in them, and so that when they go to institutions of learning like universities, they come in contact with things as let us look at evolution, for example. They will remember that Christ is the creator, and they'll be able to have some foundation to explain their belief in creation. So that's my point on this one. There's a separation. It is important to have a knowledge of the things of this world, but also it's even more important to have a knowledge of.
All right, thank you, so Elder Joseph. So Pastor Joseph, carrying on that thought, are there risks, or let me rephrase it and put it this way. So I acquire a brilliant education from a foremost university. I go to the best high school. I would have been taught by some of the best tutors, but I never had that biblical foundation communicated to me in the family. Are there pitfalls to that, having that Ivy League education without that Christian education that parents were supposed to inculcate to me?
Certainly, if an individual doesn't go up exposed to the fact that God is who he is, and that everything that we encounter in life has to be understood in context of who God is, then that educator, that student becomes very deficient. If we go back to the whole idea of and we put Christian in front of education, merely to emphasize the fact that whatever we learn, we have to see the hand of God and the presence of God in that exercise, whether we are a mathematician or whether we are an engineer or whether we are a lawyer or a doctor. If the knowledge of God and how God relates to those disciplines is not present, then we have been deprived of the value of the adequate education. Let me just kind of illustrate what I'm talking about here. You encounter a lawyer who is not undergirded by the fact that God is, and God is love, and God is concerned, and he comes into the courtroom and all he's concerned about is whether or not he can get his client, whether they be guilty or not, to escape. Okay, if you have a judge who is not undergirded with biblical principles, all he's concerned about is to ensure that whoever comes before him pay for what they have done. Now, the person who is in tune with God and understand how God operates and understand that even though sometimes a person might be guilty, you have to look beyond that point and be redemptive in your approach. Not that the judge will be callous, because what we know about God is that God is not callous about just simply giving people a blank slate. And so but that element allow for compassion, concern, and redemption. And so when a person who is an engineer sets out to create a structure or to talk about whether a structure is going to be adequately placed in the right place, and whether and what are the needed preparations in order to set a building at a particular point, and how that building need to be constructed. His understanding of God and how God created things and how God relates to things helps him to understand that unless he has a solid foundation, unless he is built with solid, reliable material, that the likelihood is that the structure will fail. And so I say that when you have God as the undergirding a principle of education, then a student is set. And let me just say this point as I conclude. When we talk about Christian education, we talk about the teacher being mindful that in every discipline, a student ought to see God for who he is.
Absolutely. Thank you. Brother Smith, I wondered if you wanted to comment on the question or what you have heard so far.
Well, yes, just following on what Pastor Orville said. You know, there are different philosophies of education. And let's consider an atheistic country. Probably could mention the Russia. Their philosophy of education, you might be surprised when you compare it with the philosophy of education in a more Christian-oriented country. You see, because for some, education, let me say, preface that by saying that one of the central parts of education, of course, has to do with knowledge. And there are different understandings or definitions of knowledge. Some people consider knowledge to be something which exists and which ought to be discovered. Some people believe that knowledge is constructed. Knowledge is what you discover. So therefore, there are different understandings of knowledge. And as a result of that, it results in so many different philosophies, and it results in situations where so-called educated people do some things that would shock you. We can recall the Nazi under Hitler in Germany, who Germany was supposed to be a civilized nation, and yet ended up executing or carrying out some of the grossest and basest acts that have ever done in human history. Why? Because the education philosophy that Hitler and the Nazis followed influenced those things, because that philosophy did not consider things like morality based upon a foundation such as, that we hold, that morality for us is based upon fundamental biblical or godly principles. So that is crucial. In education, without having a foundation that is based upon some solid moral and ethical principle, could lead, as we say, to undesirable things, including evil. So when we talk of Christian education, that's what we're talking about, an education that is founded or grounded upon principles of the Bible and upon God. And that can be demonstrated and can be proven to be the most solid education. So that is what this lesson is talking about. It's talking about Christian education, which is really true education. You know, the second discussion question at the end of this week's lesson reads thus: we tend to view education as a good thing. After all, who can be against education? But is this always the case? What might be examples of educations having been perverted and turned into something bad? All right, so education can be perverted and turned into something bad if it is not grounded upon solid ethical and moral principles, which Christian education is based upon.
Absolutely. Wonderful. And you gave a brilliant example of that, a brilliant answer to that question itself. So again, Pastor Joseph, we see now that God commits this sacred trust, this responsibility of imparting that biblical foundation, that Christian education to children. It is the primary responsibility of the family, the father, the mother, to teach and to inculcate this knowledge that would lead to a knowledge of God, his goodness, and so forth. What has been your experience? So looking at the scene today, do you still get the sense that we believe that the family is the primary educational unit, or do you get the sense that much of that is being lost and that more and more we are delivering over our children to institutions and other places to educate them?
Okay, I don't know if I'm preempting another question that's going to be coming later, but let me just say that our community today, in terms of families needing to take care of business, has necessitated that certain institutions become a reality, that our children leave home earlier, that they spend more time away from home than they do. Nonetheless, the parents should realize that the responsibility of training their children belongs to them. And so if I take the scenario where two parents are working, they have to leave early for work, what do they do with their children? So I would suggest that this necessitates that children be dealt with differently. Let me just give an example, and I'm going to use myself as an example, or my family as an example. My father and mother were agrarians. They would have to go to the garden early in the morning before the sun comes out to get the better of the temperature in order to work. What they did was that every morning before they would leave the house is that they would wake their children up. They would have worship and devotion with them. They will impart what they think they needed to impart for that day, and then they will go off to the garden. So it is that parents should not say, hey, listen, today's culture and structure demands this of us. Therefore, no, it is your responsibility to spend time with your children, to teach your children, and we'll come to that a little later, and you'll understand why. But it's your responsibility. Therefore, you cannot pass it off to institutions. You cannot pass it on to daycare. You cannot pass it on to preschool. You cannot pass it on to secondary school. It is a duty that only parents can deliver. And when parents don't deliver that, it affects how their children grow.
So, Brother Smith, I'm particularly interested in your view on this, particularly since you're there in the Ministry of Education. You've been an educator all your life. Do you find that there's a greater reliance these days from parents on the educational system to help to shape the character of their children?
Yes, that is quite so. And as Pastor Orville said, the state of affairs today, our lifestyle, has brought about a situation where the society and government are called upon to fill stand in the gap, as it were. As the pastor explained, in today's families, both parents work. Both parents have to leave very early. It's a hustle and bustle in the morning. And so that foundation that was formerly set in previous societies where the father was the breadwinner, by and large, the mother would stay at home and do those things. That is now not the case in many families. And so society, government has stepped forward. And so that is why we have a plethora of preschools, daycare centers. Notice we have private, some of these institutions are private, but notice the part played by the government in setting up these institutions for early learning. And so today, early childhood education, early learning, is a much touted concept, an idea, and it's being pushed because we realize that the society has to fill that void. And so that is the state of play today, that the society, the government, other institutions, early childhood institutions are stepping in to fill that breach. Nevertheless, it's like the best we can do. But this lesson is pointing out the fundamental importance and value of parents, both parents playing their part. And we will be getting into the specifics, I believe, a little later.
Absolutely, absolutely. Joseph, I was impressed by what Pastor Joseph shared, that under his upbringing, given the circumstances in which he brought up, the parents nonetheless did not shirk that responsibility, recognizing the demands on their time and what they had to do, but they created a system whereby they could still discharge their responsibility of educating the children. One of the things I noticed is that he said they every morning they set aside, so it was a time that they scheduled and it was a time that was consistent. What advice would you give today to parents who find themselves under busy because of circumstances, one or the other, as we have just heard described, trying now to find a way to balance the responsibility of educating their children, but yet at the same time of providing for their welfare? What are some practical tips that you can give to help them to accomplish both?
Okay, I would suggest, because most of us, both parents are working in most cases, in most families. As Elder Smith said, the situation was different back then, and now persons are putting the responsibility on the state. One thing we can do is, apart from our early morning worship, is to have evening worship. Because previously, at least one person, the breadwinner, as Brother Smith, Elder Smith spoke to, who is the husband, would usually go to work, and the mother would be home doing chores and spending time to instill that discipline all through the day with the child. Now both persons are out seeking to make sure that the economic welfare of the family is stabilized. What they can do is to have evening worship. So when you get home from work, you rest a while, and before the children retire to bed, is to spend time with them, discussing things that may trouble them, the challenges they may have, but also using the opportunity to have worship where you can to instill the word of God in them. Additionally, we can take them to church with us every time the opportunity arises, or now it is the virtual platform. Allow them to turn off the games and their other activities on cell phone, on computers, on other devices, whatever game device their platforms they may have, and ask them to join into virtual meetings. Encourage them, show them the benefit, not force them, but encourage them. And that too, from that vantage point, they will get a greater and deeper and wider knowledge of the Creator of the universe.
Thank you, Elder. Of course, all of this that we're talking about so far presupposes that the parents are Christian. What in the case, if you're not a Christian, Pastor and Brother Smith, he didn't per se have that grounding in the biblical view of education or a Christian education, but here you find yourself. Is all hope lost for you? I mean, is it too late?
Well, may I jump in, Brother Kemp?
Go right ahead, Brother Smith.
Yeah, no, if you look on the Sunday's part of the lesson, it outlines the tenets of or aspects of Christian education, and it includes things like doctrine, worship, instruction, fellowship, evangelism, and service. So that Christian education is not just simply having, well, we know the importance of worship, but remember that is just one aspect of it. And there are other parts. And so we are looking at a situation where, let's take, for example, fellowship. That is a very important part of education. And this speaks to the situation, whether the parent is a Christian or not. That is something that can be done, should be done by all families, fellowship. So that, okay, we might be busy in the morning, as Pastor just said, and so people rush off and so on. But as Brother Edson said, in the afternoon, when you come home, in the evenings, or sometime, the family getting together and sharing what happened during the day and talking, that is just as important as the other tenets. Instruction. I mean, a simple thing like a father, and this is something that I used to do all the time, everything, because I remember I was patterning after my father, who I don't think, during his life, lived or exhibited the sort of Christian values that I am trying to practice. For example, I know he was an alcoholic, he was hooked on cigarettes and all those things, but he would, everything that he did, he would have me in his workshop sitting down and say, listen, let me show you how to do this, because one day you're going to be a father, you're going to be a man, and you must learn to handle a hammer, use a saw, and those things. And tell me about planting, his garden was there, and so on. Those are also parts of Christian education. And so we must bear in mind that Christian education is not just limited to what we might call the religious parts of it, but there are also other parts that, if they are neglected, would be really to the detriment of the child. And I think, unfortunately, we have many situations where we see a family, a so-called Christian family, they have family worship every morning religiously, and then in the end, you see the outcomes in the lives of the children that might cause you to wonder, well, didn't these people grow up in a Christian home? Now, the lesson is quick to point out, though, that God equips us with free will, so that even God himself, trying to raise his children, Adam and Eve, we see what happened there. So we must also bear that in mind. But be conscious of the fact that if you have a one-sided thing, if it's only the religious, you are not really fulfilling the full gamut or the full wide foundation and tenets of Christian education. And all parents are able to do or undertake some parts of that. So to answer your question directly, if you're not a Christian parent, if you did not have the experience where you're grounded in biblical values, remember, there are several other things that you can do and should do as parents.
Okay. Pastor Joe, I see you nodding in approval there. You want
Yes. Very good point. Very good point. I think one of the benefits of, I would say, of previous generations is that most of the things that they sought to do for their children was undergirded by biblical principles. They did not necessarily practice them themselves, but they had picked it up and they recognized the value and they sought to pass it on. I think the fear in our current generation is that folks have relied a lot on secular teachings, and a lot of the coming generation moving away from the Bible and biblical principles. Hence the need for us to be more vigilant in terms of helping people to understand the very presence and nature of who God is and why he's relevant in our lives. But very, very, very good submission by Elder Smith.
Absolutely. And I just wanted, as a follow-up, really, to, in the context of what we discovered, the value of having, that Christian-based education. And in the context that today we are seeing society shifting and parents are having to make accommodations that they perhaps did not have to back then to help to train and educate for their children. I'm wondering if we see the value of having more Christian-based education in the system. What do you gentlemen think about that? No, we have our schools there, and I was just wondering if you see that increasingly the value of that is becoming more and more important, especially in the context that even today in some institutions of learning, so to speak, that religious education is frowned upon.
I would agree that perhaps that there is that need. I spent a short time at the school as school board chair, and I remember a situation where a parent came in because the child had issues that needed to be dealt with, but the parents was very clear, and that is, listen, I understand that I do not have what I need to have in order to help my child. That is why I have sent my child to an Adventist school or a Christian school, because I recognize my inadequacy. And I think that there are a lot of parents who, as I mentioned before, there are people who thought that moving away from Christianity would have been good, but now they're realizing that these are critical things that they need to have the next generation exposed to. And so they're turning back to the school, to the church. And so these institutions becomes very valuable for them. But in the same breath, I'm saying this, there is a reason why the family is important, and why education in the family is important, and why every parent should not miss this opportunity. Critical, I think the lesson points out, is the whole issue of communication, but also the whole issue of relationship. And at that very age, the tender age, up to a certain point, I think even the psychologists and the educators have come to realize that parents are in the unique position of being most impacting on their child, because of the very nature that they are being connected from birth, and there is an openness to the parents in terms of communication, but also there is the natural relationship also that exists, that are things that need to exist in order for knowledge to be able to be transferred, right? Also, the parents is in a better way. The lesson talks about the modeling, to provide that modeling. And so, yes, the institutions, yes, I believe I would agree that there would need to be more institutions, but not at the expense of the parents doing what they need to do.
Absolutely, absolutely. Brother Smith, Brother Joseph, what you want to come in here? Very, very well put there, Pastor. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, let me just add to what the pastor said, that when we look at the model provided in the Bible, and we see the clear philosophy of education is there, it's God-centered. And any education system, in addition to have a philosophy of education, will also have a curriculum, that is the specifics that ought to be taught. And we see the curriculum there demonstrated in the Garden of Eden, where Adam and Eve, God came down every day and would teach Adam and Eve about his power, his majesty, about his love, seen in his creation. Adam and Eve, when they became parents, they used those same things to teach their children. So we fast forward now to our day, where in the context of education, in the context of Christian education, we have a curriculum which includes, there's the academic part that Brother Edson alluded to earlier. That is the academic part. But remember, there are other aspects of the curriculum, and here is where the Bible and biblical principles come in. And the role of the parents in this aspect of it is crucial. The lesson points out that the first teacher for the child is the mother. And again, going back, what was the model of teaching used? God every day came down and spoke to Adam and Eve. In Deuteronomy, it is told there, Moses wrote that in instructing the children, it should be done every day, every moment. In your rising up, in your going down, you bind it upon your hand, you repeat it over and over again. It's drilling about the goodness of God, his love, and so on. That is the model. That is the teaching strategy. The teaching, all education systems, of course, will also have teaching and learning strategies. And so the teaching and learning strategy that was demonstrated as a model in the Bible is repetition, is drilling, is repeating over and over again. A mother having a baby in her arm. As a matter of fact, we are told that even in the belly, the mother should talk, to sing to the child. As the child comes out and is born, every day, regularly, the mother singing to the child, the mother talking to the child. That's the way it becomes ingrained. You know, one of the things that that bothers me now, Brother Kem, is that, you know, I live close to a primary school, and so quite often I am home when they're having their morning worship. And you know, I compare when I was going to primary school, where we had the hymn book, and we will sing those songs, those hymns. Each hymn was a sermon in itself, is a sermon in itself. Compared with what they're using now, they're using these choruses composed of a few lines. Yes, there's a message there, but it bothers me. I said, you know, the hymns that we use had a more powerful and a larger message. And so I think all of us here were from that era, and we could just relate. We are but little children, weak, now born in any high state. Those, if you look at the messages in those songs that you sing day after day, you know, that's it. And in education, one of the things that I have promised to do before I leave is to really get the schools back into using songs. It might not have to be the Anglican song from the Anglican hymn book, but really to go back to using these songs every day as part of the worship. You have to repeat a psalm. Psalm 1, Psalm 23, Psalm 27. This is, you drill, it's repeated over and over again, and it becomes part of the child's DNA. You might not see the fruit and the reward or the benefits of those things maybe in the early years, but later on, those things remain, and that is what the Bible said. You drill the children into those things. So even though they might go astray and turn prodigal, somewhere along the line, as the prodigal song said, let me arise and go back to my father. Those seeds are there, they're ingrained, and could lead the child back. That is really the essence of Christian education. So just to round up here, the role of the mother in sowing those early seeds, the role of the father in sowing those early seeds, not only in words, but also by demonstrating it in their lives. Those are the crucial things.
Absolutely. And Elder Joseph, that all of that has to be done in an atmosphere where there is cooperation, there is agreement between the mother and the father. Talk about the importance of that in helping to model what they're trying to communicate through a relationship with their children. Yes.
The Elder Ken, it doesn't matter how good an instruction you give, if there is disagreement among the instruction that's given to the child. Let's say one parent is saying, it's okay for the child to go and play football immediately after they come from school every day, but I assume the father probably would say that. And then the mother would say, no, he has to spend time going over the work that he did at school today, or engage himself in some chore around the home before he goes out. That's very important. And there must be support, because if there's not support for what the policy is, what the instruction is, there's going to be a wrong message going to the child, and that will, in most cases, be down to a child that is not well brought up, because they would have seen the disagreement, they capitalize upon it, because we tend to gravitate more to our carnal, disobedient way and having our own way in life. And so it is very important if we want to raise good children, not only for this world, but for the kingdom, we have to agree on what we are. And that has to do with about the principles of salvation and life. And that's why the Bible perhaps instructed us to be not unequally yoked with unbelievers, because that's one of the key ingredients to having disagreements and different messages within the same family structure.
Pastor Joseph, you want to add to that?
I think it is critical that that parents communicate very clearly and uniformly to their children. What I will go on to say is that whenever there is a child or expecting of a child in the family, parents need to stop and say to themselves, what do we need to do going forward? Because many times when the conflict comes, it's about me. It is about the way I do things as versus the way, let's say, my wife would do things. But what parents need to recognize now, it is not about me or the wife. It is about the child. And so whatever we are dispensing, whatever we are trying to communicate to our children, it ought to be that we are focused to make sure that that we give them what is right, what is straight, that there is no dissonance in what we are sharing, but that it coming clear from us that this is the way that you should walk in. I think one of the lessons from last week was that even though we do our best to train our children the right way, they are going to experience a conflict. And when they experience that conflict, they must not say, well, I can embrace that conflict because there's conflict at home. They should be able to say, can I measure that conflict against what I experience at home, and what choice should I make, right? And that, I think, is very important. So parents being on the same page as much as is possible is very important. They need to stop and say, listen, how do we approach this in the best interest of our son or our daughter? I think that is very critical.
Brother Smith, let's extend that a little bit to the institutions of learning, the schools. How important, because we're seeing that, yes, the education primary begins in the home, and that's where it starts, but the schools, the universities, the daycare center, they all have a role to play in that. So how critical is that cooperation between the parents and the school in ensuring that educational development continues?
Well, yes, and to continue the along the lines of creating conflict or avoiding conflict, as Pastor Joseph said, here is where the synergy between the home and the school becomes important. Because if you're going to have a situation where the philosophy of education in the school system is at odds with the philosophy or what the child is coming out of the home with, inevitably it's going to be conflicting. And I could put a plug here for Christian education, because Christian education seeks to avoid having that possible conflict between what is taught in a Christian home and what is taught at school. I've had the privilege of teaching in the Seventh Adventist school, and I'm always impressed that it's standard there that lessons begin with prayer. And as part of the lesson, the teacher finds some way of tying the lesson into Christian values and spiritual things. Every lesson should have the teacher finds some way of tying it into to God and the values that the Bible and the church upholds. And so, those sorts of things would tend to have less of a conflict, the child facing less of a conflict as he goes through his academic or formal education. But in some systems, in non-secular institutions, those possibilities exist. And it could result in severe conflict. It could result in the child being torn apart. We know, for example, we used to joke quite often, and I think we still do, not really joke, but we used to comment on the fact that when our children, when our young people leave and go to university, when they come back, they come back with some strange ideas. They come back spouting atheistic ideas and revolutionary ideas and so on, because they were exposed to a philosophy of education that might not have been in sync or in total agreement with what they left with. So again, the foundation, though, set in the home by the parents. And let me add, because we live in an imperfect society ravaged by sin, and so the ideal home is a challenge to find these days. In many homes, there's just a single parent, and in many cases, it's the mother. And so the burden or the deterrent against forming solid foundations for children along Christian lines in homes, we know is a big challenge. Notwithstanding, though, I think that there's some simple things, and to go back again and to underscore what I said earlier, one doesn't have to be educated, one doesn't have to necessarily have experienced that themselves in their lives to realize as a parent, and we're talking about a parent now. The pastor Joseph alluded to the fact that in preparing for parenthood, and I teach social studies, and one of the topics is preparation for parenthood. And I always stress that, listen, you're going to, when you decide that you're going to be a parent, notwithstanding what you might have experienced, understand that there's certain basic things. You have a responsibility to the child. Whether you're the mother is the child's first teacher. The father is very, very close behind as well. And there's some things that you should do. One of them is modeling the behavior. All right, what happened to you? You should determine, not going to happen to my child, so therefore I'm going to model something different. I am going to try to lead my child along the lines that, from my experience, I have learned to be the more appropriate ways, the more conducive ways, and those things are to be stressed. So yes, if the home is failing to provide these things, and if the formal institutions are failing to undergird or to add support to sound values upon which education is built, that society really is going to face a lot of problems.
Absolutely. And Pastor, in looking to wrap up,
Elder, just before you go there, there's a question on the YouTube. Do I have to enroll my child in a Christian institution of learning to give him or her a Christian education?
Okay. Pastor, take that and while you're answering that, just talk about the importance of Thursday, which stressed the fact that lest we forget to carry out this sacred responsibility. Yes.
Okay. So yes, I would say predominantly in our school system right here, the focus is on academic excellence and success. Elder Smith earlier referred to, the days when we went to school, teachers were more in tune with training the whole child, so that if you give trouble at school, that's not the end of it for a teacher. They're going to connect with parents to say, hey, listen, Orville is exhibiting a certain kind of behavior. I know that's not consistent with what you teach him, and we're trying to bring him in line. I'm not sure that happens today. What happens at the Christian school, or even at our Adventist school, as Elder Smith also alluded to, there is what they refer to as an integration of faith and learning, right? And so we always see the education of the child. Let me put it this: we always see the education of the child as a tripod: the home, the church, and the school. Okay? And it is essential that the school is in sync with what was taught in the home, and that the church is in sync with what was taught in the school and the home, and that the home and the school is in sync with what is being taught at the church. And we talked earlier about the dissonance, or the unity of communicating unity to our children, and that becomes a critical and central part. It is valuable for us and instructive for us to understand that if we do not pay attention to the things that we need to pay attention to, making sure that as parents we pass on to our children what they need to have, making sure that as they move to another level. I think in the question before, Elder Tong, you alluded to the fact how we make the transition from the parent as the early classroom to the next classroom, which is the school, and to the next level, making sure that we connect at every level, that we communicate what are the values that we have for our children. If we neglect those, we are likely to suffer the consequence of regret. Okay, and so it is important for us to keep focus. Notwithstanding, we have made this point before, even the best teacher failed because there are distractions. But the good news is, one, the good teacher never stopped loving. The good teacher never stopped teaching. The good teacher never stopped enabling. And so we need to make sure that we remain focused and on target with our children.
Absolutely. Brother Myrick, would you give us your parting shot? It's hard to imagine that an hour has gone by. We could go on for another 3 hours just educating one another and just enjoying so much of this lesson. But could you give us your parting shot at this point?
Yes. The most difficult job in the world is teaching. And if you doubt that, just ask Jesus. The most difficult job in the world is teaching. And that is because students have a free will. They have a free will. God created us with the sacred gift of free will. And ultimately, when our children become adults, as the lesson points out, our children will have to answer for themselves before God. They make their own choices. And so it's a difficult job, and there can be no guarantees in carrying out this job that the end result, the goal, our objectives, all our objectives would be realized. But just as Pastor said, that should not stop or deter the teacher from doing his or her utmost best to produce good students. And so Christian education, my parting word to be, do not look at Christian education as just be what is offered in Adventist institutions. Christian education involves the home as much as it involves Christian institutions such as schools and our colleges and so on. And so the teachers, the first teacher is the mother and the father, and then the church, as the pastor points out, and the other important persons in that child's environment as that child goes through life. So we all have a responsibility. We all have to equip ourselves, and with the blessing and the guidance of God, we pray and hope for the best for our children.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Elder Joseph, your parting shot.
My parting shot today will be a quotation from Ellen White. Because God desired to see gathered out from the homes of people a large company of youths who, because of the godly influence of their homes, have surrendered their hearts to Him and go forth to give Him the highest service of their life. Directed, trained by godly instruction of the home, the influence of morning and evening sessions of worship, consistent example of parents who love and fear God. They have learned to submit to God as their teacher and leader. God is the greatest teacher. God is who we want to take our instruction from. You can see people every day who are very intelligent. Academically, they're sound, PhDs, masters, first degree, but the behavior is atrocious, unbecoming. and some who you would really want to work in your institution if you own one. When we prepare our children with a God foundation, that makes a significant difference. That's my contribution.
Absolutely. And I think I want to part on the note that Elder Smith hinted to, and also Pastor hinted to, that the greatest teacher, even though when we would have grown up and would have made our wayward choices, he doesn't stop teaching us. Most importantly, he doesn't stop loving us, because he keeps reaching and reaching and reaching out to us, because he wants to educate us in the way that we should go. And it's an important lesson for us as parents, that even when our children become grown, we never lose the responsibility of trying to educate them. And even when they make their own decision, I think the greatest lesson of education that we can give to them is to continue loving them even stronger than we loved them when they were behaving, quote unquote, as we would say. So, Pastor Joe, it's been a pleasure again having you on this morning. Thank you so much for the contributions. Brother Mike Smith, it was absolutely amazing having you. We hope that you could come back on soon so that you could add some more of your wisdom to our discussion. Elder Joe, as usual, the tower of strength behind this and keeping us going. Thank you so much again. And to our listeners and viewers, thank you again. We want to invite you back next week. It's going to be even as interesting or even more interesting, because next week we're going to be looking at the law as a teacher. That's right, you heard me, the law as a teacher. You're asking, well, how can the law teach? Well, find out next week. It's going to be explosive. So we hope to see you back here next week, same time on Whispering Hope for Summer School. Until then, from all of us, may God bless you.